Blake Shelton had always been known for his strong presence, his effortless charm, and the calm confidence with which he carried himself through any stage, any crowd, any situation. But on this particular morning, something felt disturbingly different. The sunlight creeping into his bedroom didn't feel warm today. Instead, it felt harsh, almost blinding. As he slowly sat up on the edge of his bed, he felt an unusual heaviness in his limbs, as if invisible weights had been tied around him during the night. He closed his eyes for a moment, waiting for the dizziness to settle, but it only intensified. His throat felt dry, and even the simple act of breathing seemed slightly more laborious than usual. For a man known for his loud laughter and energetic performances, this sudden weakness felt foreign, unsettling, and strangely frightening. Blake tried to stand, but his legs wobbled slightly. He grabbed the edge of the nightstand to steady himself, hoping that maybe he just needed a few minutes to fully wake up. After all, he had been performing non-stop for months: shows, interviews, charity events, rehearsals, and endless traveling. His schedule had been insane, even for someone as seasoned as him. Maybe this was just fatigue. That's what he kept telling himself. But deep inside, a small, unsettling voice whispered that something wasn't right. He walked slowly toward the bathroom, each step feeling heavier than it should. When he finally looked at himself in the mirror, he froze. His reflection didn't look like the Blake Shelton he knew. His eyes looked dull and tired, with faint dark circles beneath them, something he had never noticed before. His skin looked slightly pale, and there was a subtle tremor in his hands that he couldn't ignore. He splashed water on his face, hoping it might revive him, but it did nothing. His heartbeat felt slightly irregular, and a wave of nausea rolled through his stomach. This wasn't normal exhaustion. This was something else. But Blake wasn't someone who liked to worry others, especially his team, who already carried the weight of his career on their shoulders. He forced a small smile, wiped his face, and walked out of the bathroom, determined to push through the day like he always did. But as he made his way down the hall toward the kitchen, his vision blurred for a moment, and the world tilted dangerously. He caught himself on the wall before he could fall, breathing hard as a sudden cold sweat broke across his forehead. For a few seconds, he just stood there, eyes shut, waiting for the spinning to stop. The house was silent, and in that silence, his fear grew louder. He knew he couldn't ignore this anymore. He needed help. With trembling fingers, he reached for his phone and called one of his closest team members, a man who had worked with him for years and knew immediately when something was wrong. When Blake's voice came through the phone, weak and strained, his team member instantly understood that this wasn't something small. Within minutes, they were on their way to Blake's home, their worry increasing with every second. By the time they reached him, Blake was sitting on the couch, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, trying to steady his breathing. His skin looked even paler now, and his eyes held a distant, unfocused expression. His team rushed to him, asking questions, checking if he was responsive, but Blake simply shook his head, whispering that he didn't feel right. They wasted no time in getting him into the car and driving straight to the hospital. The ride felt longer than it actually was, each passing second filled with tension and fear. Blake tried to stay awake, but the exhaustion pulling at him felt too heavy to resist. His head rested against the window as he watched the blurry world pass by, his thoughts drifting between confusion and anxiety. Nurses immediately took control, placing Blake on a stretcher and rushing him inside. His team followed closely behind, their hearts pounding, praying for good news. Blake's senses felt dull and distant, as if he were floating in a strange haze. He heard voices around him, doctors giving instructions, machines beeping, nurses moving quickly, but everything sounded muffled, like he was underwater. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out properly. His chest felt tight again, and he could feel his heart racing in a way that scared him more than anything else. Several tests were performed: blood work, scans, heart monitoring, and Blake lay there in silence, staring at the ceiling with a growing sense of helplessness. The hospital lights were too bright, too cold, and the sterile smell made him feel even more nauseous. He closed his eyes, wishing it would all end quickly, wishing he could simply wake up and feel normal again. After what felt like hours, the doctor finally entered the room, carrying a calm but serious expression. Blake's team immediately stood, waiting anxiously for answers. The doctor approached Blake with a gentle smile, trying to ease the tension. The news, however, wasn't as dramatic as Blake had feared. According to the doctor, his symptoms were the result of extreme exhaustion, dehydration, and excessive work stress. His body had reached its limit and was now forcing him to stop. It wasn't a dangerous illness, but it would become dangerous if ignored. Blake needed restand, not the kind of rest where he pretended to relax while secretly planning his next project. He needed real rest, medication, proper hydration, and several days of doing absolutely nothing. The doctor warned that if he didn't take this seriously, his condition could worsen. Blake listened quietly, relief and guilt mixing inside him. He had pushed himself too hard. He knew it. Everyone knew it. But hearing it from a doctor made it real. For the first time in a long time, he felt vulnerable, like the world could continue without him. But his body couldn't. As he lay back on the hospital bed, his mind drifted into a deep silence. He wasn't just tired, he was exhausted in a way he had never experienced before. As Blake lay in the hospital bed, listening to the quiet hum of machines around him, a strange mix of emotions began to settle inside him. Relief, because it wasn't a life-threatening illness. Fear, because he had pushed himself to the edge without realizing it. And guilt, because he had never allowed himself to slow down, not even when his body begged him to. The doctor's words echoed in his mind like a warning bell he could no longer ignore. His team stood nearby, exchanging relieved glances now that they finally had an answer, yet worry still lingered in their eyes. They knew Blake too well. They knew he wasn't the kind of man who liked to appear vulnerable or accept defeat, even if the defeat was simply admitting he needed rest. For a long moment, Blake remained silent, staring at the ceiling, processing everything. The white tiles above him formed a pattern that somehow calmed him, and in that moment of stillness, he realized he hadn't been truly calm for months. His schedule had become a relentless cycle: travel, rehearse, film, repeat. It was a cycle he had willingly stepped into, but somewhere along the way, he had forgotten that he was human too. He wasn't made of steel. He wasn't invincible. He finally understood that even the strongest hearts needed a break sometimes. His thoughts slowly drifted to the people who cared about him, his fans, his friends, his family. What would they think when they found out he was in the hospital? How would they react when he told them he needed to pause everything for a while? Blake exhaled softly, a sign of both surrender and acceptance. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe life was telling him to slow down before he burnt himself out completely. The idea felt uncomfortable, almost foreign, but oddly comforting at the same time. The hours passed slowly. Nurses came and went, checking his vitals, updating his IV fluids, making sure he was stable. Blake appreciated their quiet dedication, though he barely spoke. His voice felt weak, not from pain, but from emotional exhaustion. He drifted in and out of light sleep, waking occasionally to the sound of distant footsteps or the soft beeping from a machine next to him. Each time he opened his eyes, he felt just a little more grounded, a little more connected to the moment. Later in the evening, when things had calmed down, one of his closest team members pulled a chair beside his bed. He didn't speak at first. He simply sat there, giving Blake company without demanding conversation. Blake eventually turned his head and managed a faint smile. It wasn't his typical wide, charming grin. It was tired, but genuine. His team member finally broke the silence by telling Blake how worried everyone had been. He reminded Blake that even the strongest performers needed time off. No spotlight, no cameras, no expectations, just rest. Blake listened, feeling a warmth grow in his chest. He had always appreciated the loyalty of the people around him, but moments like these reminded him just how lucky he was. It wasn't fame or success that made a man rich. It was the people who stood beside him when he fell. After a little while, his team member left to let Blake rest, and the quietness of the room returned. Blake shifted slightly, trying to get more comfortable, and let his eyes drift toward the window. The night sky outside was peaceful, painted with stars he had never taken the time to admire lately. He wondered how long it had been since he had truly paused to appreciate simple things like this. Fame often came with the price of sacrificing small joys, and Blake had paid that price without realizing it. As he continued to watch the night sky, a soft knock came at the door before a nurse entered with medication. She handed him a few pills and a cup of water, explaining the dosage in a calm, professional tone. Blake nodded, obediently taking the medicine. He felt a slight warmth spread through his chest as the pills began to work, easing some of the discomfort and fatigue. He thanked the nurse quietly and watched her leave. The stillness around him once again took over, and this time it felt gentle, almost soothing. For the first time in what felt like ages, Blake allowed himself to relax without rushing to the next thing. His mind wandered to memories of early days in his career nights, spent writing songs on his old guitar, moments when music was pure passion without pressure. He could almost hear faint echoes of those melodies, reminding him of the path that had brought him here. It wasn't fame that had pushed him, he had simply loved music. Somewhere along the way, that love had been overshadowed by the demands of his career. Fatigue began to settle deeper into his body, but this time it felt lighter, as if rest was finally catching up with him. His eyes grew heavier, and he let them close slowly. For the next few hours, Blake slept deeply, his body finally surrendering to the rest it had desperately needed. The medical staff continued monitoring him through the night, checking his vitals and ensuring everything was stable. The next morning, Blake woke up feeling slightly better. He wasn't completely okay. There was still weakness, still a lingering ache, but he felt a tiny shift inside him. A small spark of energy had returned. His breathing felt easier, his head clearer. He sat up slowly, stretching his legs under the blanket. The doctor entered the room soon after, greeting him warmly. He checked the chart, reviewed the test results again, and reassured Blake that everything was manageable as long as he complied with the rest plan. The doctor emphasized that Blake's condition was not unusual among performers. People who lived fast-paced, high-pressure lives often reached breaking points without warning. Blake listened carefully, absorbing every word. He wasn't surprised, but hearing it laid out so clearly made him realize how little he had cared for himself lately. He agreed to follow the doctor's instructions strictly, promising to take the next several days completely off. After the doctor left, Blake leaned back against the pillows, letting everything settle in. This wasn't the end of anything. It was a pause, a necessary one. He didn't want to disappoint his fans, but he also knew he couldn't give them his best if he kept pushing himself this way. He needed to heal, recharge, and come back stronger, not just physically, but mentally too. The day passed slowly but peacefully. Blake spent most of it resting, reflecting, and regaining his strength. His team handled all the public statements, ensuring fans knew he was safe and recovering. Messages of love and support began pouring in from all over the world. Blake didn't check his phone, yet he wasn't ready. But knowing his fans were there for him brought comfort he desperately needed by late evening. Blake felt calmer than he had in months. He wasn't healed yet, but he was finally moving in the right direction. And deep down, he knew this was just the beginning of a journey he hadn't planned for, but perhaps desperately needed. By the time Blake was discharged from the hospital and allowed to return home, a strange quietness surrounded him, a quietness he wasn't used to, yet somehow welcomed. His home felt different now, almost like a sanctuary, rather than just a place to sleep between performances. The soft hum of the air conditioner, the gentle rustling of trees outside, and the distant chirping of birds created an atmosphere that was peaceful and healing. Blake walked slowly through the hallway, each step measured and calm, feeling the warmth of familiar surroundings. His body still felt weak, but there was a sense of relief in being back in his own space. The doctor's instructions echoed in his mind: rest, medication, hydration, and absolutely no work for at least a week. It sounded simple, yet for someone like Blake, slowing down felt like learning to walk all over again. He settled on the couch, leaning back against the cushions, letting his breaths come naturally. His home felt unusually quiet, without the constant buzz of his team, the sound of rehearsals, or the planning of upcoming events. For the first time in months, there were no deadlines, no pressure, no responsibilities pulling him in every direction. The silence felt a little strange at first, almost too calm, but slowly it began to wrap around him like a comforting blanket. He opened the windows to let in fresh air, and a gentle breeze filled the room, carrying with it the scent of nature and peace, something Blake hadn't taken a moment to appreciate in a long time. He spent the first few hours resting, sipping water, and letting his body adjust. His muscles felt heavy, but the rest was helping. His mind, however, wandered endlessly. He thought about his career, the choices he had made, and the pace he had maintained for so long. He wondered why it had taken a scare like this to make him realize he had been neglecting himself. Sometimes, he mused, life had to shake you hard to wake you up, and he had definitely been shaken. As he sat quietly, he glanced at the guitar, leaning against the walla symbol of his greatest passion. It had been days since he touched it, But today, he simply looked at it without feeling the urge to play. For once, he wasn't thinking about melodies or lyrics. He was thinking about himself. Later in the afternoon, his phone vibrated with multiple messages: friends, family, coworkers, all checking in, all offering support and love. Blake didn't feel ready to talk yet, but just seeing their names made him feel a little less alone. He replied to a few close ones, assuring them he was okay and recovering. One message, however, caught his attention. The most hit was from a longtime friend, someone who knew him beyond the spotlight. The message simply read, "Proud of you for slowing down. Don't rush back. We need you healthy." Blake stared at the message for a long moment. The simplicity of the words touched something deep within him. He saved the message and put his phone aside, feeling a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in days. As the sun began to set, the sky turned shades of orange and purple, casting soft shadows across the living room. Blake watched the sunset quietly, realizing he couldn't remember the last time he had truly looked at one. His life had become a blur of schedules and commitments, leaving little room for moments like this. The beauty of the evening sky made him realize just how much he had missed. He took a deep breath, letting the peacefulness of the moment settle into his heart. Slowly, the stress he had carried for months began to loosen its grip. The evening passed gently. Blake cooked a simple meal for himself, something he hadn't done in ages. The act of preparing food, moving slowly around the kitchen, and taking his time was oddly therapeutic. He ate quietly, feeling grateful for the calmness around him. After dinner, he sat by the window, watching the stars appear one by one in the dark sky. A soft breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the coolness of the night. The world outside moved slowly, and Blake found comfort in matching its pace. He realized that maybe life wasn't meant to be rushed all the time. Maybe slowing down wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a form of healing. Before going to bed, Blake took his medication as instructed. The doctor had warned him that he might feel tired or sleepy, and that rest was essential for recovery. Blake didn't fight it. Instead, he allowed himself to surrender to the natural rhythm his body needed. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how close he had come to ignoring the signs. His body had been crying for help, and he had almost missed the message completely. Now, lying in the quiet darkness, he promised himself he would listen more carefully from now on. Sleep came slowly but peacefully. Unlike the restless nights he had become used to, tonight his body seemed willing to cooperate. He drifted into sleep like a leaf floating down a gentle stream, carried by forces beyond his control but embraced by comfort. Throughout the night, he slept deeply, letting his body repair and recharge itself. The next morning brought a gentle sense of renewal. Blake woke up feeling slightly stronger, with a clearer mind and lighter muscles. For the first time since the symptoms began, he felt genuinely hopeful. He took a moment to stretch, feeling the subtle shifts in his body as it continued recovering. He made himself a cup of warm tea and stepped outside to sit on the porch. The air was crisp, and the morning sun felt warm on his skin. Birds chirped in the trees, creating a melody that felt like nature's good morning gift. Blake closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and allowed himself to feel the present moment without worrying about anything else. As he sipped his tea, he thought about his fans. They had always been there for him through every high and every low. He knew they deserved an update. He didn't want to worry them, but he also didn't want to pretend everything was fine. So he opened his phone and typed a short message, a simple, honest update, letting everyone know he was okay, taking some time to rest, and grateful for their love and support. Within minutes, messages and comments flooded in. People from all over the world sent prayers, encouragement, and promises to wait for him no matter how long it took. Blake felt overwhelmed in the best possible way. Their support reminded him why he loved what he did. Music wasn't just a career, it was a way to connect with souls. And knowing that connection still existed reminded him that his journey wasn't over. It was simply paused. The rest of the day continued in the same peaceful pattern. Blake rested, took his medication, stayed hydrated, and embraced the slow pace life had forced upon him. He felt his energy returning in small waves, not enough to be fully active, but enough to feel alive again. As the day ended, he felt a growing sense of gratitude. This break, though unplanned and unwelcome at first, was beginning to feel like a blessing in disguise. It was teaching him to appreciate himself again, to value his health, his peace, and his well-being. In the quiet of his home, Blake realized he was healing, not just physically, but mentally too. The journey wasn't over yet, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The next few days slipped by quietly, each one becoming a small step toward Blake's recovery. The simplicity of his routine brought him comfort. He never expected waking up when his body was ready, enjoying quiet mornings on the porch, taking his medication on time, and listening to the steady rhythm of nature outside his window. He hadn't lived like this in years. Life had always been about the next show, the next city, the next demand. Now, for the first time in a long while, everything slowed down enough for him to appreciate the little things that once went unnoticed. He felt like he was rediscovering a part of himself that had been buried beneath years of pressure and responsibility. As the days passed, Blake's strength returned bit by bit. The heaviness in his limbs lightened, the dizziness faded, and the clarity in his mind sharpened. He no longer woke up feeling like he was dragging the weight of the world behind him. Instead, he felt a steady calmness, a grounded stillness that made him feel increasingly grateful for this unexpected pause. Every day brought improvement, even if only in small ways. Some mornings he woke with a little more energy. Other afternoons he found himself able to move around more freely without feeling exhausted. Recovery wasn't instant, but it was steady, and Blake learned to appreciate the progress without rushing it. One afternoon, while he was organizing a few books in his living room, his eyes landed on the guitar he had ignored for days. Something inside him stirred a faint spark of creativity that had been silent since he fell ill. He approached the guitar slowly, almost cautiously, and lifted it gently. The wood felt familiar beneath his fingers, warm and comforting. He sat on the couch and let his fingers brush against the strings. The soft vibration filled the room with a subtle, soothing sound. For a moment, Blake simply held the instrument. Breathing in the comfort it brought, he played a few chords, slow, gentle, almost hesitant at first. But as the notes drifted through the air, something awakened inside him. The music didn't demand anything from him. It didn't expect perfection. It simply allowed him to feel, and in that small moment, Blake realized how much he had missed this playing, not for an audience, not for a schedule, not for a deadline, but for himself. The melody he created carried the softness of healing, the quiet strength of reflection. It wasn't a song meant for the world. It was a song meant for his soul. After finishing the simple tune, Blake set the guitar aside and found himself smiling. This wasn't a comeback moment or a dramatic breakthrough. It was something much quieter, much deeper, an internal shift. He felt like he had reconnected with the part of himself that first fell in love with music years ago. The part that didn't care about fame or pressure, just the pure, simple joy of expressing emotion through sound. Later that evening, Blake prepared a cup of herbal tea and stepped outside onto the porch. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in warm shades of gold and pink. The world felt peaceful, almost serene. He leaned against the railing and watched as the day slowly melted into twilight. A soft breeze brushed against his skin, carrying with it the scent of the earth and the whisper of approaching night. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, letting the calmness wash over him. The stillness reminded him of the hospital bed, how afraid he had been, how uncertain everything felt. But now, instead of fear, he felt gratitude. The scare had forced him to slow down, but slowing down had given him something priceless: clarity as the stars began to appear. Blake's mind drifted to his fans again. Their messages, prayers, and support had touched him in ways he hadn't fully expressed yet. He knew he owed them a deeper message, a more personal update. So, after finishing his tea, he went inside, grabbed his phone, and began typing. This time, his words came naturally. He wrote about his exhaustion, his hospital visit, and the doctor's advice. He admitted that he had been pushing himself too hard, and that his body had finally forced him to stop. He thanked his fans for their patience, their love, and their unwavering support. He told them he was recovering well and taking the time he needed. And he promised them something important, that, when he returned, he would return stronger, healthier, and more dedicated than ever. After writing the message, Blake read it slowly. It felt honest, vulnerable, real. For someone constantly in the public eye, showing vulnerability wasn't always easy, but this time it felt necessary. He posted the message, put his phone aside, and breathed in the silence. When he finally checked the comments hours later, he saw thousands of messages: encouragement, relief, love, and gratitude. His fans weren't disappointed. They were proud of him. They wanted him healthy. They wanted him happy. And for the first time in a long time, Blake felt understood not as a celebrity, but as a human being. The following days continued to bring gentle progress. Blake's energy returned more steadily, and he found himself walking outside more often, soaking in the sunlight and fresh air. He occasionally played guitar, sometimes humming soft melodies that came to him naturally. He spoke to family more, shared laughs with close friends, and spent quiet moments simply being present. His team handled all the work-related details, giving him space to heal without worry. The world outside kept moving, but Blake no longer felt pressured to keep up. He understood now that pauses were part of life, too necessary and important. As the final day of his rest period approached, Blake found himself reflecting on everything he had been through: the fear, the hospital room, the diagnosis, the enforced rest, and the slow but powerful healing. It had all taught him a lesson he would never forget. Health wasn't guaranteed. Strength wasn't infinite, and even the brightest stars needed time to recharge. He promised himself he would never ignore the signs again. He would balance his life better. He would listen to his body. He would cherish the quiet moments just as much as the loud ones. On the morning, he was cleared to return to normal routines. Blake didn't rush. Instead, he spent a long time sitting on the porch, sipping tea, watching the sunrise. A soft smile formed on his face, a smile of appreciation, of gratitude, of newfound strength. He felt ready. Not to jump back into chaos, but to return with balance, awareness, and a healthier mindset. When he finally picked up his guitar again, the melody that flowed from his fingers felt different, stronger, deeper, filled with emotion and experience. It wasn't just music. It was a reminder